Thank you so much. They were wonderful songs, weren't they? Focusing us back on belief, really. So, the disciples. It's been really interesting, hasn't it? I don't know whether you've found it interesting, but I have. I'm amazed how little I really knew about lots of them and what a motley crew they were. I don't know if anyone else has been watching The Chosen, but the characterization in The Chosen has really brought the disciples to life for me. And I think in many ways it's massive evidence of the power of God, isn't it? That small group of people transformed and brought Christianity right across the world, and here we are today. Anyway, I was really glad when I got asked to speak about Thomas, because he's my favourite. And I think his story gives us special encouragement. And whoever you are, whatever you feel like today, there's definitely a promise in here for you that you can take home with you. So well done for being here. So Thomas, a bit like some of the other disciples, he's listed in all the Gospels, but really nothing much about him apart from in John. He's sometimes known as Didymus, which means the twin. There again, I'm hugely frustrated. Was he an identical twin? Was it a boy twin? Was it a girl twin? We'll never know. There's so much in the Bible like that, isn't there, where you think, if only I knew a bit more. In any event, there are three main mentions of Thomas, and really, they're all highly significant. I think the poor guy gets really bad press. He's always called doubting. But actually, I love him because he's so my kind of person. He asks questions. He wants clarification. He wants to be sure of things for himself. He's not going to be conned or fobbed off by other people. He wants to know. So the first time we hear much about him, it's in John 11. I think Brian's got that passage. It's the story about Mary and Martha. They've sent a message to Jesus to come because their brother Lazarus is sick. Jesus says to the disciples, he holds off for a while, you'll remember that. He says to the disciples, let's go back to Judea. The disciples query this, and they say to him, look, the Jews there were only recently all set to stone you. You definitely don't want to go back there. But Jesus talks to them, doesn't he, about walking in the light and that he's going to go. And then eventually, to kind of convince them, it almost seems, he tells them that actually Lazarus is already dead. Then Thomas says to the others, let's go with him that we may die with him. So here you see a Thomas who's very committed and very brave, and he sets his course to go. The other disciples are saying, don't go. Thomas is saying, we must go. Then we get to John 14, the other passage, that lovely passage where Jesus talks about there being many mansions in his Father's house, and he will go and prepare the place for them, and they know the way and will follow him. Now, I wonder what it felt like when Jesus said that. I wonder whether some of them thought, well, I'm not quite sure what he's talking about, but I don't think I'll say anything. But good old Thomas, honestly, we don't know where you're going. Only Thomas seems to query it. I don't know where you're going or the way. And so I'm so glad he asked that question because we got the clarification. Jesus is very clear and he makes that astounding declaration. I am the way, the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. I don't know what Thomas was expecting, but I don't honestly think he was expecting that answer. What an extraordinary thing to say. In fact, if it wasn't true, it was quite outrageous, wasn't it? I am the way. I'm the only way. I don't know what Thomas thought, but I think he must have taken it on board because he's already very committed. He's already mentioned going to his death because he knows the truth. So he's brave and he's going to follow. And so he's saying, let's go. He knows that this journey might end in danger and death. Now, the third mention is the one we had and read. Thank you, Giles. And that's the infamous doubting Thomas story, isn't it, that everyone quotes. If you go back and try and imagine, what was it like after the crucifixion? What on earth did those disciples feel like? They must have been frightened, despairing, shocked, horrified. I wonder if any of them remembered Jesus had tried to prepare them, hadn't he? He had spoken about his death, but I'm not sure really how much they had taken on board because it was such a strange concept, wasn't it? So they're meeting together that same day when Mary's actually been to the tomb and come back and said that she's seen Jesus, but she's a woman, she might be hysterical, we're not very convinced, we're all scared stiff, we're all locked in. Suddenly, there's Jesus, speaking words of peace to them. But who isn't there? Thomas. No idea why not. Why doesn't it tell us why he's not there? The Gospels are full of these sort of tantalizingly absent details, but in any event, later on in the Gospel, he does go back fishing with Peter, so I don't know if he was a fisherman as well, I couldn't find out. Maybe he went off fishing. Maybe he was too scared. Maybe he was too miserable. He'd lost the person that he had dedicated his last few years to, and who he really believed was going to save the world and was the Messiah. We don't know where he was, but can you imagine what it was like when the other disciples told him, and they kept telling him, we've seen him. Do you know what? I would have hated it. I would have hated it. They're all fired up, confident, excited, and there's Thomas feeling left out, confused, maybe even annoyed. How unfair was it? How could he not have been there? When you read the response of what he says, it's familiar, but actually it sounds really quite angry, doesn't it? I won't believe unless I see him myself. Put my hands in the holes in his hands and put my hand in his side. Think about it, that's a pretty vicious idea, isn't it? To put your hand in a fresh and bloody wound in someone's body. I think it's just a measure of his desperation and his confidence that they were all wrong. So it didn't matter what he said because it was never going to happen, was it? And then you've got 8 long days. 8 days, that is a long time when all the other disciples are telling you that Jesus has come alive again and you're still not convinced, or are you beginning to become convinced and incredibly upset that you've missed it? Are you feeling left out, sad? I don't know about you, but I've been to various Christian events where I've definitely felt the left out one. Everyone else seemed to get a massive blessing and I felt like a stone. I know it's not quite the same, but that feeling of being the one that's outside is something that a lot of us might recognise. The interesting thing is that Thomas does still go and meet with them. He's still there. So then finally, on the 8th day, thank God, Jesus finally comes, again through closed doors, speaks peace to them, and offers Thomas the exact same words that Thomas has used. I mean, reach here with your finger and see my hands. Put out your hand and put it in my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believe. Using the exact same words in itself must have been totally convincing, mustn't it? Thomas must have immediately known, this is Jesus, and he is alive. I don't think for a minute he needed to put his hands anywhere, did he? He just said, my Lord and my God. Huge declaration of his faith. And then comes the crucial bit for us that we can hang on to. Jesus says, blessed, i.e. happy, spiritually secure and favoured by God, are those who do not see me and yet believe in me. So that's us, isn't it? We're those ones we haven't seen. So I love Thomas. He's honest, he questions, he's committed, he's prepared to die with Jesus. He's passionate in unbelief and in belief. He triggers those amazing words in John 14 and then the promise of blessing on us who believe but haven't seen. So what about doubt for us? I personally am someone who does doubt quite a lot. I think I always have through my life. And I have moments where I think, do I believe, is this really true? Because sometimes it seems so foreign to the rest of the world, doesn't it, our Christian faith? And so remote from everybody around us, especially these days in a post-Christian era. So if you don't doubt, you can just switch off now and think about your lunch, that's fine. But for anyone who, like me, sometimes gets doubt, what do we do about it? It can be horrible to suddenly have that overwhelming wave of fear that maybe none of it's true. Things are going wrong. People are ill. Your prayers are not answered. Everything is going wrong. People just almost taunt you that it's just wishful thinking, the opium of the people. So what do we do during those times? There's a few things that I've thought that I've found helpful, and maybe you would. Maybe number one is we should notice that Thomas still hangs out with the disciples. So however wobbly you feel, and however annoying the Christians are around you, try and keep meeting up with them. Try and keep hanging out with them. Keep going. Spend time with other people that do believe, even if they can be a bit irritating in their confidence. Number two, John talks about all the signs and wonders written in the Word so that will help us to believe, doesn't it? At the end of that passage Charles read. So, read the book. Keep thinking about the stories of Jesus, what he said. The things Jesus said are just so incredible. Either the man who says them is a C.S. Lewis, about as wise as saying he's a poached egg, or he's telling the truth. I think Chris may have read us this quote earlier in the year. I have it somewhere in my mind. Something C.S. Lewis wrote that I think is so helpful about Jesus. Because so many times people say, oh yes, he was a good teacher, but nothing more. I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept that Jesus is a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That's the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sorts of things that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic, on the level of a man who says he's a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronising nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. I just think that's, it kind of clarifies it, doesn't it? It settles it in your mind. If Jesus wasn't telling the truth, then he was a very evil, terrible deceiver. None of it makes sense, does it? The words he says are so incredible. If you can't face reading it, maybe listen to Lectio, listen to the Bible in a year. Maybe just look at the Psalms, the laments. They resonate with our souls, don't they? And sometimes you feel something just inside of you when you hear those words, even when your faith is thin. Number 3 for me is looking at the world. For me, the wonders of creation are so extraordinary and endlessly express God's great creativity. As you know, I've just had 2 new grandsons, and every time I see them, I just think these are miracles. Look at these tiny little bodies, tiny little fingers, eyes looking around in a brand new, fresh world. And every single one of you came like that. Miracles of creation. You look out at the beauty of the skies, the seasons, mountains, lakes, beautiful music, art, even the scientific laws of gravity. Creation declaring, there's that verse, isn't there, in Romans 1, that says, since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what he has made. It's very hard to believe it's all an accident. I know some people do, but for me, that's very, very hard. A few months back, I was walking around Dunallen Lake, which I often do, and I saw some baby moorhens. Moorhens are fascinating to me anyway. They have these tiny spindly legs and huge feet. But the babies are almost ridiculous. The size of their feet is the size of their whole bodies nearly. And I was looking at these extraordinary things and thinking, who the heck designs that? Who made that? What are these? And somehow it just brought joy to me. I looked it up and apparently they have flat feet so they can go over the marshlands. But I almost thought God was amused, He made something so spectacular. If we designed it, those tiny little legs, I think it would have fallen over. Anyway, so look at the world. The other thing is, and we've done it this morning, notice things. People noticing God moving in their lives, little things, God appointments, where you bump into somebody and it's just the right thing. Whispers of God, the answers to prayer we have and we forget. Share them with each other because, I think it all helps us. The most crazy thing that happened to me recently, and I'm not even sure I should say this, but Mary Wilson and I pray on a Monday morning, and my cat, who's no longer with us, but my cat was driving me absolutely mad. She meowed incessantly, she was old, and we'd had an issue with a foreign cat coming through the cat flap. So I'd spent a lot of money and got a cat flap with a chip that reads the cat's chip so the cat can come in and no foreign cats can come in. So this is going to be the answer, except I did not allow for the fact that the cat would not use it. So we then had various problems that you get with cats that normally go outside and are no longer going outside. Moving on smartly, in despair and very frustrated, I went back and bought an old sort of cat flap, thinking, well, she'll recognise that and that will work. Spent more money, put a new cat flap in, took her to the cat flap, not having it. By this time, I'm beside myself thinking, well, there's nothing else I can do. That morning, the cat was wailing around our feet, and Mary, being Mary, prayed for the cat. Now, I've got all sorts of issues I'm not quite sure about praying for animals, but in any event, she prayed for the cat. So I just said amen, because, what do you do? And we got to the door. I'd opened the door to let the cat out through the extension and shut it. And we got to the door and said goodbye to Mary, and I heard a click. And in walked the cat through the cat flap. Now, you could say that is mad. The world is falling apart. There are wars everywhere. And maybe it is. But it's like that person that said, when I pray, coincidences happen. I almost felt like God was saying, look, I'm not massively fixing everything in one fell swoop, but I'm here. And I know every last detail of your life, even the cat. And I know it seems mad, people, but I think for me, I need to notice those things and remember and thank God and turn to him, talk to him, speak to him, even in your unbelief. You know that prayer, doesn't it? Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. I think a lot of it is having our eyes just open, watching, seeing things. Talk to Jesus, talk to him, tell him that you can't believe, that you don't even know if he's there anymore, if that's the case. After all, Thomas was open, wasn't he? And look what happened. He stated his position very, very clearly, honestly, and God came to him. Say the Lord's Prayer even, if you can't say anything else. Just keep going. And lastly, even after the cat story, this is also quite heretical, but have you ever thought about the alternative? About not believing? About it all being lies? What would this awful world look like? How grim would it be? No creator, no purpose, no life after death, no love, no morals, no kindness. I don't know if any of you are old-fashioned Narnia story readers, but there's one of the stories, there's a character called Puddleglum. I don't know if that rings a bell with anybody. And he's a marsh wiggle, which apparently is a very tall, long, thin, lugubrious chap who is always very, very negative and pessimistic. And he and the children he's with have been imprisoned by a witch, and they've gone underground into a dark world. And in this world, there's no sun, there's no light, and she's telling them there's no Aslan, the wonderful lion, the great lion that represents Jesus. And they have believed and been trying to follow Aslan, and so she's trying to hypnotize them and tell them, and they're falling asleep, and she's saying, there's no sun, there's no light, there's no Aslan. And suddenly, Puddleglum, the most negative of all, girds up his loins and says, suppose we have only dreamed and made up these things like sun, sky, stars, and moon, and Aslan himself. In that case, it seems to me that the made-up things are a good deal better than the real ones. And if this black pits of a kingdom is the best you can make, then it's a poor world. And we four can make a dream world which will lick your real one hollow. And then he says, I'm on Aslan's side, even if there isn't any Aslan to lead it. I'm going to live as like a Narnian as I can, even if there isn't any Narnia. And I know it maybe seems an odd thing to say, but God has made us with a restless, God-shaped hole inside us, hasn't he? Restless till we find our rest in him. And it says somewhere in the Old Testament, doesn't it? God has set eternity in our hearts. We instinctively look for something more. And I think it's because it's true, people. I think it is. So bring it on for Thomas. He battled on, held his faith, voiced his doubt, and left a promise for all of us. Don't give up, people. Doubt is part of faith, and you are blessed for your perseverance when you don't see, and you keep believing, and you're all here this morning. So well done. Apparently, tradition has it that Thomas travelled the world as far as India, taking the message of Jesus. It's thought, like so many of the disciples, he died a martyr's death there, ironically pierced by a lance. His faith didn't give him a trouble-free life, but it gave him a wonderful message to spread and share, and a personal knowledge of Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life, and the promise that he was going to be eternally reunited with Jesus in heaven. So, keep going, people.